I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Welcome to another Mail Call Mondays, and this Monday we're going to talk about an extremely exciting subject, and that's gun lubes. Now, over the years, we've used a pretty wide variety of different gun lubes. Some have their pros, some have their cons, some work really well for a wide variety of stuff, and some really don't work well at all. So we're going to talk about a couple of the different lubes that I've used and how they've worked out and what applications I like to use them in. Now, we're in a pretty temperate climate here. In the summer, our hottest hot days don't rise much above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Our cold days, usually the coldest winters we get, we're down in the teens. So it doesn't get really super cold to where we have to worry about most lubricants gelling up. So keep that in mind when I start talking about this stuff. The main reason I wanted to talk about this is I've had some experiences recently with one of the more popular lubes, and also one of the other lubes, namely Fireclean. There has been a bunch of stuff blow up online about it. So first of all, let me preface this by saying we are not paid by any company that produces any lubricants. We haven't been sponsored by any of them. The only thing is we'll occasionally get some samples in from this company or that company, or they'll kick us a little bit of stuff, but nothing to say we endorse this company or we endorse that company. My view on lubricants is there's a lot of stuff out there that will work just fine. You need to use what works for your specific situation, for your specific firearm. Some firearms will like a certain type of lube better than others. You need to try some different stuff and see what works for you. Basically, what I have laid out here in front of me is some of the different lubes that I've used over the last couple of years. Starting down here on the left-hand side, we've got Militech 1, and I've got a little needle oiler here of M-Pro 7. Got some REM oil, the little single-serve things of M-Pro 7. Froglube, got a little tube of TW25B. I've got current formulation CLP, old military formulation CLP, and automatic transmission fluid. So let's talk about some pros and cons of the various different stuff that we have here. First of all, Militech 1, I got a bunch of this stuff a while back. I like the fact that it came in these little bottles. It's real easy to throw in your gear, keep in your pack. It is a CLP, and it's supposed to be one of these that you can treat your weapon and then run it almost dry. Rarely ever do I do that, but there have been quite a few times when I'm either doing a training day or something where I've lubed my rifle the night before. I have run hundreds of rounds through it through a training day, and it's been bone dry at the end of the day, and it still worked just fine. Part of that has to do with the way I build my rifles and the way I maintain my rifles. My work carbines are not tight match grade precision rifles. They are down and dirty gunfighting rifles, so they're made to be able to run in a very wide range of environments, wide range of lubricating levels. So that has worked just fine on those. I've also used Militech 1 on the bolts on my Remingtons, and it seems to work pretty well. They slide pretty smoothly, so I don't really have a lot of problems with that. One thing that I like about Militech 1, and we'll talk about this as we go through these different lubes, it is not one of these where you have to either clean all the old lube off before you change to a different type. Some lubes, when you start to change between the different types, they want you to clean it off. They say if you mix the types, you can get some issues. And anytime you're mixing chemicals, you need to be careful of what chemicals may interact with other chemicals. But with Militech 1, say for instance, I forgot a bottle of lube on that day, or I just don't want to go back to the bench or don't want to go dig in my gear bag and I grab somebody's bottle of CLP and dump it in the gun, I'm not going to get crazy reactions. It works just fine. I haven't seen any issues whatsoever, and that's kind of important because Militech 1 is designed and marketed to the military. And if you've got guys that are using Break Free and guys that are using Militech 1, you really need to make sure that there's no cross-contamination, that it will work just fine. Next up, I've got the M-Pro 7. Now both Militech 1, M-Pro 7, and the Break Frees are what are called CLPs. That's Cleaner, Lubricant, and Protectant. And one thing that I see quite often is anytime you try to make one chemical do a wide variety of jobs, it's either going to totally fail at something or it's going to be mediocre at everything. CLPs generally work pretty decent at busting carbon off your weapon. They work pretty decent at lubricating it and keeping it running, and they work pretty decent at protecting it from corrosion. But they're usually mediocre at each one of those jobs. They don't clean as well as a dedicated carbon or copper solvent. They don't lubricate as well as a good quality grease or high viscosity oil, and they usually do not protect as well as a packing grease would. So it kind of does okay at all three of those jobs. If you really want the best of each, then you need to find products that work with each other for each one of those separate jobs. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. One thing that I really liked about M-Pro 7, and we figured this out when we did the Mutt tool, the Leatherman Mutt tool review. We got the Mutt tool in a M-Pro 7 cleaning kit, and it included their gun cleaner and their copper solvent as well. And with those three together, I found it's really actually a pretty effective cleaning system. The gun cleaner comes in a nice spray bottle, so it's easy to spray inside the receiver of, say, an AR. It's easy to spray all over the bolt and that and let it sit. And it really worked fairly well in helping us wipe down the carbon and get the carbon out of there. The copper cleaner worked fairly well as a copper solvent, and so we really didn't have any problems with that. I liked how the overall system works, and again, I liked the fact that those chemicals were specific to their jobs. Now, in a pinch, the M-Pro 7 CLP itself would work for all three, but the cleaners work better for that. So M-Pro 7 does a pretty good job for us, and we use it on quite a few different rifles currently. M-Pro 7 and CLP at various different times are still pretty much my go-to for AR-15s, AKs, or handguns because it's just really easy to use. Like I said, I keep it in these little needle oilers that you can get from Brownells, and I can get it wherever I need it. I can buy it in large quantities to dump it in its own bottles. And overall, I just enjoy the way it works. Next up, we've got REM oil. REM oil is a really interesting product, and the only thing that I use this on are bolt-action triggers. REM oil is basically, from what I understand, Teflon in a light carrier oil. I actually tested this a while back by shooting some on some printer paper and just kind of let it sit overnight, and the next day pretty much all the carrier had evaporated out of it, and it was just a dry spot left over, which is really what it's supposed to do. You're supposed to be able to use this on the triggers, drop a couple of drops in a Remington trigger after you've flushed it out with lighter fluid to clean any debris out. Drop a couple of drops in, and it's supposed to allow the Teflon to distribute through the trigger, and the carrier will evaporate and just leave you with basically a dry lube in the trigger. You don't want to really put oil, like I wouldn't want to take any of the M-Pro 7 and drop that down into a Remington trigger, because M-Pro 7 and some of the other CLPs, they really want to hang around for as long as possible to allow those lubricating properties to stay there. Well, what that also does is it allows dust to attract and fine grit to build up, And inside a Remington trigger is really the wrong place for fine grit and dust. You want to keep all that stuff out of there. So the fact that the rem oil, the carrier, evaporates and doesn't attract any more dust is a really, really good thing. So we found that works pretty well, but that's pretty much the only place that I use rem oil. You're supposed to use it throughout your entire firearm or stuff like that. I don't find that to be the case. I wouldn't try to use rem oil as a corrosion inhibitor. I don't think it would work really well for that because, again, the carrier evaporates and you really don't have any barrier between the metal and moisture. Next up, again, we've got M Pro 7, but these are these cool little, basically what I call single serving tubes. I picked these up a while back, I think, or I got them in a kit with something else. And they're really nice to just be able to throw in your gear and keep as an emergency supply. The one drawback to them is once you tear that top off and start using it, there's really not a good way to seal it up. If you're back here in the shop and you have to do it in a pinch, you can take those little binder clips that you get in the office supply store and those clip onto them and keep them closed, or a paper clip. But when you do it in the field, pretty much once you tear that open, that oil is going to get everywhere. So use it and discard it. Next up, well, let me back up here before we go to this next stuff. Let me go to the TW25B. This is a really nice synthetic grease. It's fairly lightweight. It's kind of like the consistency of white lithium grease. You do have to shake it up a little bit because the liquid and the grease likes to separate a little bit. So I always shake the tube up before I open it. Otherwise, I get a little bit of liquid that drips out before I actually get grease. But this stuff I think is great for bolts. Bolt lugs. I'll use it in both ARs and in bolt action rifles. And it has this nice little applicator tip on it. So I can just dab a little bit on the back of the bolts. On Remingtons, I'll put it on the side of the lugs too, the ones that track in the bolt raceways. And then I'll put it on the extraction cam and the cocking cam of the bolt. That way that area is lubricated as well. And it seems to hang around pretty decently throughout a firing day. One thing that I like about it over using something heavier like moly grease is that it doesn't stay around too long. It seems to dissipate after a while, and it doesn't hang out in there and collect powder, grit, debris, brass shavings, etc., to the point where you're going to have to clean it out later at some point. If you use something like moly grease, which I'm sure there are some guys that do, and you start getting a little too much in there, then that moly grease likes to stick around for a long time, and you're going to have to go in there eventually with something like carb cleaner and try to blast it out. If you're not getting in a situation where you're getting extreme heat, you know, like bolt guns usually don't run really hot. This stuff works great. If you need something to stick around a whole lot longer, a whole lot higher temperatures, then moly grease works really well. Just regular bearing grease. You can get the stuff at AutoZone in these great big tubs that last forever. But that stuff will work fine. This is nice because this little tube, I've been using this tube for probably 4 or 5 years now. That's how sparingly I use it. Just a little dab on the bolt lugs and on those cocking cams and the extraction cam. So great stuff. It works just fine on ARs. Now, the grease, I'll use that on the lugs on large frame ARs. Small ARs, 223 ARs, I just use CLP on the backs of the lugs. Nothing ever on the bolt face. Bolt guns, ARs, what have you, we don't ever put any lube on the bolt face. That can cause big problems with either pressure. It can cause problems with deadening primers. So don't put oil on the bolt face. But that stuff works good. Next, let's talk about Froglube. Now, you guys have asked me to do a review on Froglube for a long time, and I'm finally kind of at a point where I feel comfortable with giving my opinions on Froglube, and it's kind of a two-stage thing. Now, initially, I really wanted to like Froglube. I got some in. I went ahead and just bought a tub of it and some of the liquid. after receiving some of the small samples. And I like the way it smells. It has kind of a minty aroma to it. It's supposed to be non-toxic. It's actually supposed to be food grade. So you should be able to ingest it if you really wanted to. And this was attractive to me, not because I really want to start putting Froglube on my steaks, but because I end up with oil all over my hands quite a bit working with guns. Some of the ARs that we have, I'll end up with it splattered across my face and my mouth and my nose, breathing the fumes in. So if it's something that's non-toxic, if it's something that's biodegradable, if it's something that's less likely to give me cancer at some point, then I'm all about giving it a try. So I was excited, got it in, decided that on our first Mega Arms Ma-10 build, that we would run Froglube in it from the absolute get-go. So tried it out, still running Froglube in that rifle to this day. That rifle works fine with Froglube. Now it doesn't seem to have as good a corrosion inhibiting properties as some of the CLPs, and definitely not like packing grease. I think it is somewhat water soluble since it's biodegradable and all this stuff, so I don't think it presents as good a barrier to moisture. But for most of what we use that rifle for, where it's going to be out, it's going to be shot, we're going to bring it back and clean it up, it's not a big deal. Now, shooting that rifle, as far as the lubricating properties, the Froglube seems to work great. We did not pre-treat like Froglube suggests, where you lube up the parts and then you throw them in an oven and bake them to allow the Froglube to work its way into the pores of the metal. We didn't do any of that, mainly because it's a 308 AR. That thing gets hot. So we just applied Froglube liberally to the parts of the rifle that we wanted to lubricate, and we ran it and let it heat up and let the Froglube do its thing. And it seems to work, again, great in that rifle. I can break it down, wipe it down pretty quickly, re-lube it, throw it back together, and it's good to go. Froglube also sells a cleaner with the kit. I'm not so much of a fan of the cleaner. I don't really think it does anything. I've sprayed it on, and I think water would probably work just as well. So the cleaner doesn't seem to do a big job. I'll just take the GP brush and a little bit more Froglube and scrub it in to scrub off carbon or anything. As I said, used it, shot that rifle for several thousand rounds, and it's worked great with the Froglube. So when we built up the 6.5 Creedmoor Ma-10, I decided, it worked with that Ma-10. Let's use it again with this one, because again, it's big AR, it's throwing stuff around. I'm breathing in gases of the cooked off lube, so I'd really prefer to have something a little bit non-toxic. One major difference between the 6.5 Creedmoor Ma-10 and the 308 Ma-10 is the bolt carrier group that we used. On the 308, we used a DPMS, just off-the-shelf rack-grade DPMS 308 bolt carrier group. So it's bolt and the carrier. It was just plain Parkerized steel. It wasn't anything special, no crazy coatings on it. This rifle used a Fulton Armory bolt carrier group that had a nickel boron coating on it. And here's where I think the main difference between these two rifles is. I think the bolt carrier group from Fulton Armory, I think, is a little bit tighter because of the nickel boron coating on it. I haven't checked to see how thick their coating actually is, but I do believe it took up a little bit of clearance space. And then secondly, I think the nickel boron coating may not have allowed the Froglube to do its thing as far as treating the metal, and I don't think the metal holds the Froglube as well as a Parkerized finish. Parkerizing tends to allow the oil to stick around a little bit longer than a really polished, smooth finish. What we noticed after shooting the 6.5 Ma-10 with Froglube on it is that I could shoot the rifle for a day, and this thing is big, heavy, that stuff is slamming around in there pretty good. So we didn't have any problems feeding, we didn't have any problems with the rifle cycling. But if then at the end of the shooting day I unloaded it, cased it, brought it back home and then let it sit for a little while, I would almost have to hammer the charging handle back to get the bolt to unlock. Once I unlocked it, I could cycle it and it'd be really gritty, really sticky. And if I let it sit again a little while longer, I would still have to hammer the bolt back until I actually got in there and put some more lube in to soften things up. This went on. At first I thought it was just the rifle's a little bit tight. You know, we didn't have any problems with this on the other Mod 10, so I figured we just needed to break the carrier group in a little bit. And this one, the bolt uses a McFarlane one-piece style gas ring, whereas the other Mod 10 uses 3 separate gas rings like a standard AR. So I figured maybe that was it. Maybe the nickel boron coating in the bore is a little bit tighter than it is in a standard bolt carrier group. So I had all these, excuses in my mind of why this wasn't working. Not coming back and just saying, oh, it's just a Froglube. Then the final straw came after the last match, when again I found myself really having to hammer the charging handle back to get the thing open. I figured, okay, enough's enough. I went ahead and cleaned it really, really well and lubed it up with M-Pro 7. And we shot this rifle earlier today, and the bolt is still nice and smooth. Now, it didn't put a lot of rounds through it today, but if I let this rifle sit without cleaning it for the next 2 or 3 days, it's still going to be that smooth. M-Pro 7 does not gum up. It appeared that the Froglube was gumming up for whatever reason. And this is actually a complaint that we've heard quite a bit with Froglube. And I don't know, I had heard a rumor that they had changed some formulations to try to fix it or not, but people that have had problems with Froglube, they've had problems with it gumming up. Froglube, you're not supposed to mix it with other petroleum lubricants. They say if you do mix it with petroleum lubricant, then that can cause some of the gumming issues. This rifle has never had petroleum-based lubricants in it prior to switching from Froglube to M-Pro 7. It was always Froglube from the get-go, from the absolute first that I built the rifle. It used Froglube. So the only thing I can surmise is something with the nickel boron wasn't allowing the Froglube to soak in. It's sitting on top of the coating. Or it's something with a byproduct of burning the H4350 powder that's reacting with the Froglube and it's causing things to gum up. The other rifle, the 308 Mod 10, it's never had H4350 in it. I've always shot either Varget or Reloader 15 or commercial ammo. So I don't know if powder may be contributing to it or not. It was just really odd to me that one rifle is working just fine with it and this one is not. So what is probably going to happen now, this rifle, we have switched it over to M-Pro 7. It will run M-Pro 7 for the remainder of its life. The Froglube, I will stick with the Mod 10 on the Froglube, on the 308 Mod 10 until I'm out of Froglube. And one thing I will say with Froglube is a little goes a really long way. I've had this tube for quite some time now and I'm not even a quarter of the way into it. Smells great. I just opened it and I can already smell the minty freshness of it. And I really wanted it to work. It just does not work in this rifle. It might work in bolt actions fine. I just have not been willing at this point to dedicate a bolt action to it. And that's one of the hits that I will give on Froglube. One of the reasons I have not tried it in more wider variety of weapons is because when you use Froglube on a weapon, you have to clean it completely bone dry first. No petroleum products left anywhere in it. Lube it with Froglube, and then you can't use petroleum products on it again until you get to a point where you clean all the Froglube out of it, and then you can use petroleum again. This is a no-go for most professional shooters because I can't take a duty weapon that's going to go through armor's inspections or that's going to be out of my control while it's being maintained and use Froglube on it, because the armors, I'm not going to bring in my own lube and hand it to the armors and say, make sure you only use this on it. There's way too much possibility for disaster there. Armors are just going to grab whatever is the issued lube at the time and throw it on the weapon, and that's going to be that. So in a professional aspect, unless your whole unit uses Froglube or your whole department uses Froglube, then you're really not going to be able to use it on your work guns, because you can't switch back and forth. So that is a little bit of a problem. Whereas again with the Militech 1, not really recommended you do that, but if you dump CLP in a gun that was treated with Militech 1, it's not going to gum up, it's not going to go nuts on you. I'm not really cool with that, and it prevents me from, especially with my higher end rifles, trying it out on it, because I don't want to go through the trouble of totally stripping those weapons down and totally cleaning them out if the Froglube doesn't work out. So that's about it on Froglube. I'm not saying Froglube's bad, I'm not saying you shouldn't use it, but if you decide to try Froglube, make sure you keep its limitations in mind and be prepared to go through that trouble if you run into gumming issues and all that, where you may have to end up cleaning it all out and just giving up on it. Lots of 1911 users seem to have had problems with it because 1911s are really sensitive to slide velocity, and you've got a lot of slide bearing surface in your standard 1911. So you get it in there, if it starts gumming up in a 1911, you're going to have some real issues there. It shouldn't be as difficult to clean it out of a 1911 as it is in an AR or a bolt gun, but just keep that in mind if you decide to use it on a 1911 or other pistol of that type. Now, let's talk about break-free CLP. Anybody in the military recognizes break-free, and we've got two different formulations of it. This bottle here is the commercial and current formulation of it. This is an old bottle of the military formulation, and they smell drastically different. And I haven't really seen the particles floating around in the commercial version like we had in the military version. So they changed formulations at one point, and the main difference you could tell was the smell between the two. The old CLP, I think it had more of a sweet smell to it. The new one is kind of more of a, I would say, a bitter taste or bitter smell. Yes, I did say taste, and you haven't been in the military if you at some point haven't had CLP sprayed in your mouth. So, CLP is really, I think, the standard lubricant for ARs. It just works. You can dump bottles of this stuff in an AR and it'll run. Machine gunners, yeah, you've used tons of this in saws or 240 Golf or anything like that. It just it gets brushed on M16s when they go back in the armory. So hopefully they won't find that it's a contributor to cancer, because my skin has been soaked in CLP at points. CLP is still what my department uses mainly as lubrication for our whole range of firearms. And the stuff works. Again, it's one of those intermediates. Break-free is not specifically a cleaner. It's not specifically a lubricant. Not specifically a protectant, but it does all of them marginally well. I really don't think CLP works well for cleaning copper. It seems to work fine for busting carbon, but as a copper solvent, there are much better options out there. And real quick, talking about bore solvents, I don't have it sitting out here just because I totally flaked about pulling it out of the cabinet when I was getting ready for this, but my bore solvent of choice is still Hops number 9. Hops number 9 is a good medium level solvent. There are much more aggressive solvents out there. I've used Butch's Bore Shine before, which seems to strip copper a whole lot quicker, but you want to stay on top of it. Sweets, there are really a bunch of other ones out there that are really aggressive copper solvents, but copper's a metal. You're using the solvent to dissolve a metal out of your metal rifle barrel, so you need to stay on top of it. I think hops is really a much milder solvent. So if you leave it in a little bit longer than you expected to leave it in, you're not going to come back and find your bore pitted. Now, I still don't like soaking things overnight or any nonsense like that, but I'll run patches down and let it soak for a little while and then run patches through to clean it out. I'm not going to go into detail on how to clean semi-automatic or bolt-action rifles because we already have videos out there for that, and I'll leave a link in the description below on our semi-automatic and on our bolt-action rifle cleaning videos. So check those out if you want more details. But hops number 9, part of the reason I use it is because it's a mild solvent. The other part of the reason I use it is because it has such a nostalgic smell to it. Those of you guys that have used it know what I'm talking about, since it is the first gun solvent that my father showed me how to clean rifles with. That smell really stuck with me from boyhood, and really it's like knuckle-dragging gunslinger perfume. It really is the cologne that you think of when you think of working on rifles. So the smell of it is great. Hopefully hops will never ever change the smell. I don't care if they change the cleaning chemicals that are in there, but hopefully hops number 9 will always smell like hops number 9. So that is my preferred bore solvent because of its mild cleaning action, because it's not as aggressive as other stuff, and it seems to get both the carbon and the copper fairly well. Now the M Pro 7 has a nice system where they have a specific dedicated carbon cleaner and a specific dedicated copper cleaner, but you know, it's whatever works better for you. Hops seems to work. I don't have any problems with it. It gets my rifles clean. Lastly, let's talk about this little blue bottle here. Yes, this is regular Automotive automatic transmission fluid. Automatic transmission fluid has detergent properties in it, has anti-corrosive properties in it, has lubricating properties in it. This stuff will run just fine in ARs and AKs. You don't need to buy super expensive stuff. If you are on a very limited budget, automatic transmission fluid will work. Just the amount that you have left in a bottle after you've topped off a transmission is probably enough to keep your AR running for quite some time. Now also, a properly built AR and a properly maintained AK, they can run with just about anything. You could pour coconut oil in there, you could pour used motor oil in there, and it's going to run. Just be careful about mixing stuff, because some fluids, you try to mix them, they're going to do weird things and gel up on you and do all kinds of nonsense. But in temperate environments, you can get a properly built AR or AK to run on just about any lubricating fluid. You could drop bacon grease in it and the thing's probably going to run just fine for you. Just watch that you strain out the little piece of bacon first. So, you know, that's one of those things to keep in mind. Now, automatic transmission fluid, it'll work fine in a big, heavy AR like this. But I don't think I would really try to lubricate a bolt gun with it. You could. I'd be really sparing with it because I don't want it getting down into the bedding. I don't know what it would do to fiberglass bedding. That I haven't tried out. And it brings up another good point on bolt-action rifles that have fiberglass bedded stocks. Don't get crazy with your lube. Don't go dumping it in there, because you really don't want that to work in to the bedding and to soften up the bedding of your stock. So that is really about it about the lubricants that I have sitting right here. We don't get paid by any lube company. Nobody has bought advertising with us at this point. So really, this is just my opinion of how the various lubes have worked fine. Now let's talk about Fireclean really quick. Due to all the blow up on the internet, you know I can't get through a video talking about lubricants without talking about Fireclean. I've had some people try to convince me to use Fireclean before. I just never got around to it prior to the craziness. But If you don't know what I'm talking about, there was recently a bunch of articles on the internet, the lovely internet, about Fireclean, and that Fireclean apparently, after chemical analysis, greatly resembles, almost to a T, chemical analysis of vegetable oil, just standard kitchen cooking vegetable oil. Which is really interesting because all the claims that Fireclean has made about how their product performs and what benefits it has, when you find out that it is very similar to standard vegetable oil, I'm not going to say it's the same because I don't have the qualifications to make that claim. But the chemical analysis makes it look very almost identical to kitchen cooking oil. That just brings up really a whole different aspect of it. Now, without getting into if Fireclean is or is not vegetable oil, I'll let you make that your own determination on that. It is supposed to be a non-toxic oil. It's supposed to have a lot of the same kind of claims as Froglube has had, but there are a lot of people out there who have run Fireclean and really like it. Now, vegetable oil is really inexpensive compared to Fireclean. And again, we get back to that, a properly built AR or AK is going to run on just about any lubricating oil. I'm sure you could pour regular vegetable oil into your rifle and let it run. Again, this thing with Froglube gumming up into it ran just fine. So I'm sure that I could use cooking oil to lube this rifle and it would work just fine. So you really need to look and find out what works best for your rifles. Don't buy into the hype. Don't buy into the marketing. Just because Trainer X or School X uses this kind of lube, or they recommend this kind of lube, look a little deeper. Or are they recommending it because that certain company has bought advertising space with them? Are they recommending it because that company supplies that school free of charge with that stuff? Look a little deeper into it before you invest your money into it. And then finally, don't drink anybody's Kool-Aid. Try different stuff. Figure out what works for you. Look at the price of it. Look at the availability. Look at what your buddies are running. And I really suggest you stay away from stuff that requires that you only use their type of lube, because if you end up in a pinch, you end up somewhere where you can't get your stuff and you need to borrow some. You don't want to be in a situation where you're trying to mix two vastly dissimilar chemicals in your rifle while you're running a high rate of fire and burning powder inside of it. So just keep that stuff in mind. That's really about all I have on lubricants. So I really like to hear what you guys are running in your rifles, how it's worked for you, and how you like it. And I'd really like to know why you chose whatever particular lubricant that you are using. So please leave that down in the comments section below. Now, before we go, last week we talked about our little giveaway. We've got a Sniper's Hide Day 1 Precision Rifle Training DVD here that we were giving away, and we asked you guys just to simply comment in the comment section of that video. And Patrick is our winning comment. We randomly selected a comment, and Patrick won it. So we're going to go ahead and hit you up through the YouTube app or through the YouTube system. If you don't hear from us in a couple of days, then please drop us an email at 8541tactical@gmail.com with your information, and we will get this shipped out to you. Well, that's all we have for this week. If you've liked this episode, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. If you got any questions or comments, leave it in the comment section below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. And until next time, get out and shoot!